All right, welcome to On the Bench. I'm your host for this episode, Brendan Sonnone. I'm joined by Zach Blostein, Chris Nee, Zach in Tallahassee. Hello.
Hello.
We're not doing it in person, though. We probably should have since we're all kind of in the same place, but whatever. Zach, you're not at your parents' rental property because it's being rented right now. And who's helping your parents make money at this time?
The Turner Group.
The Turner Group. So, as we're going to start off this podcast, a shout out to our sponsors, the Turner Group, sponsors by or Sonnone. Spring is blooming. It's beautiful outside in Tallahassee. You want to look out your window and be like, yes, I see my forever home across the street. I'm going to buy that. I want to go and have a money making venture that Zach is currently not able to be in his place in because of that. But his family's making money off of it, and Zach just has to slum it a little bit in the Airbnb. That's fine. You got a chance to do that too. Colin and Amy Turner can help you get where you want to go and facilitate money making ventures or just get you to your dream home. That's pretty cool. Also, shout out to Chattanooga Whiskey. They got a Prohibition style whiskey coming out, right? I think actually it's out at this point. You can go check it out at sealbacks.com. You can go throughout the state of Florida and try to find yourself a bottle. It's one of their experimental batches, but sounds exquisite. It's proofed at 110, which I think is legitimately 110 is probably the perfect proof for a whiskey, or their 111 standard, but it's a special edition, 4 years old, blend of different malts and rye and whatnot, which is kind of standard for them. But the tasting notes sound exquisite. Talking about chocolate chip cookie dough and plum, and it sounds really good. Look for it. It's got a green label on it. But anything Chattanooga Whiskey does is awesome. So here we go, guys. It's Tuesday morning as we're recording this. We got to talk to Coach Norvell, Coach Gus Malzahn, Coach Tony White, all the assistant coaches, honestly, but with a lot of new names and faces coming into the FSU orb. Spring practice is about to start, and we're learning about a lot of new things. Unfortunately, we won't be able to see a lot of those new things for ourselves, and that's kind of a bummer. Something I've really enjoyed doing is going to practice, but Mike Norvell did shift his media policy, and I think that's where we're going to start off the podcast, simply because it's what you guys, I think, really want to talk about. Like, I think it's been pretty clear on the message board that people are gravitating towards this conversation. Everyone seems to have an opinion on it. And so let's talk about it and then kind of be done with it. We don't have to really ever relive it or relitigate it at all, talk about it. But I think it is important because it's a data point in my estimation, maybe not a substantial one, but it is a data point and change. Let's talk about it. So Mike Norvell, through FSU Sports Info, released a statement yesterday about the change in media access. And I'm going to quote that here real quick. As I evaluated every aspect of our program this offseason, I came to the decision that the majority of this year's spring practices will not be open to the media. In my first 5 seasons here, we provided unmatched access to members of the media to observe practices during the spring, preseason, camp, and game weeks. I appreciate and respect the media's role in telling the stories of people in our program and keeping our fans informed. In a day and age where so many people have access to our players, I wanted to create an atmosphere free of outside perspectives during our time of preparation and development. The availability of our program in terms of post-practice media opportunities and individuals' requests for players, coaches, and staff members will remain the same. This is not a suggestion that I think this last season's record had anything to do with media members observing our practices, especially after we won 19 games in a row in 2022 and 2023 with media at practice. However, this is the best decision for our program at this time. All right, Zach, I'll start with you. Simple question. Why? Why do you think this was something that the program decided to shift from its previous policy?
Well, I think there's a few different factors. I do think that Mike Norvell has had this in mind for a while. I also think that there's influence from new staffers, specifically Gus Malzahn, who, talking to UCF reporters, had very, very strict practice access, like a couple 15-minute windows of practice access so during spring football and then fall camp and, nothing during game week. So, yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's some of that. And obviously Mike respects Gus, and that's one of the reasons why he brought him in as a mentor for him. One of the people that really got him into the coaching industry. So I mean, if you take his the words that he put out in that press release at face value, right? About eliminating outside noise. I mean, I I truly like that. That's not the reason, because if that was the reason, this is only going to create more outside noise, in my opinion. Because with the old practice policy for media, they only really allowed us to make observations of basically positive players who were impressing in practice, because they would push back at us putting something out there about a player losing a rep and not wanting that player named specifically as a competitive disadvantage thing. But now, I mean, they're not going to control the message. We're going to still cover the program and cover practice and what's going on, because that's our job. I think that's a part of this that's somehow getting lost in translation with some of our subscribers, is like us not having practice access, through the universe, like through the school just allowing us to be there, means that we're just not going to cover practice. Like, that's not what's going to happen. We're still going to cover it and try to do the best job of bringing our readers what's actually going on. But now, like, that message is not going to be, it's going to be through different people's eyes instead of our own. And some of those people might have an agenda or a bias, and that's just natural, right? Like, people have biases. So, like, to me, I don't buy that being the reason for why they're shutting down practice, for eliminating outside noise, because I think this is only going to create more outside noise once we start reporting on injuries and which players are starting and which players are not getting starting reps.
What do you think, Chris? You've been around, you've covered the Bobby Bowden regime that was very open. You covered the Jimbo regime that was pretty closed off. Willie's was kind of a mixed bag. So you've seen it all, and you've adapted and figured it out of how you covered it in different ways. But this wasn't a surprise to you when the release came out yesterday. What are your thoughts on why, and I guess how does it impact how you think we do work from here on out?
On the why, who knows? Like, I'm not going to sit here and play doctor with what they're thinking on their side. If they want to be direct about it, they're more than welcome to be direct about it. They have people's phone numbers. It is what it is kind of how I view it. Changes the way we go about doing our business, because we still have a business to do. Disappointed we're not able to see it directly and gather our own thoughts and make our own opinions, whether right or wrong. Still going about doing that and doing it in that manner. And now it's all secondhand, basically. And yeah, it's a change, and we're not the ones who changed.
My take on it is, I think this falls in line. Like, you mentioned change, and I think that's important, Chris, is like, we, to be transparent, have called for change, right? We thought it'd be good for Mike Norvell to reevaluate a lot within his program, and that includes coaching staff and how he operates things. And this falls in line with a change. Now, it's a change that impacts us directly, and just like, to be transparent, I love going to practices. It's one of my favorite things. I didn't love it so much last year, especially in the end of the season, where it just didn't feel like things were getting better, but it was still, that was instructive and formative, and that helped us pivot in what we were seeing. But I also think it's like, and Chris, you don't want to play doctor here, maybe Zach will, but like, I also think it contradicts some of Mike's core philosophies. And I think that's what, like, one thing to change your scheme is one thing to change, okay, how you operate your business. But when we talk about core philosophies of transparency, and I mean, I could pull up, if you want, the quotes of what he gave in 2021 about the opportunities for players. And I understand the landscape of college football has changed in a few years. But what they believed in terms of how they go about their development and their in-practice coaching styles. And he's talked about that on record multiple times, and having pride in the way they go about doing things. And I find it more alarming that you've kind of shifted off of that, of being like, here we are, we don't have anything to hide. Like, this is what we do, and this is how we do things, as long as it's not a competitive disadvantage for us. Take a look and see under the hood, and it will be a selling point for us as a program. I know in the press release, he said he didn't think winning or losing had anything to do with making this decision, or he said it didn't have anything to do with making this decision. I mean, I do, they did consider closing access after the 2023 season. They did not. They've closed it after the 2024 season. Intellectually, I can't get behind that. Like if they had won 10 games last year, that this would have been the what would have happened. But regardless, I think it's an alarming change when you start changing your core ethos. And I think that's kind of what this is. You talk about mental toughness, and in his statement, he's kind of talking about protecting players. Nixon says there's a lot has changed, and that's a data point to me.
Yeah, I agree. Something that always comes to mind when talking about media access and just that 2023 team specifically, like I think a major, and I'm not trying to toot our own horn and give us a ton of credit, but this is just the result of media access. I think one of the main reasons why that team was so loved and why everyone could get behind a majority of players on that team was we saw their journey, right? Like that 2022 season, the start, the ups and downs of Jordan Travis's career. Like we got to document that from when he couldn't throw a pass in the wind to when he was a Heisman finalist. To me, like those are the true like benefits and something that Mike Norvell, when he first got to Florida State, brought up as one of the main reasons why he wanted to be so open with media at practice. And I also want to share this, like personally,
real quick, Nikita, I think he's scrutinized over that part of it. Like I think that is something that he probably lost time thinking about and weighing and bothered him in making this decision for what it's worth.
On that note, them releasing it this week was another, in my opinion, was maybe worse than the actual policy change, because we all had an idea that this was going to happen once they didn't clearly communicate that things were going to be the same with practice access like a month ago. But I have reached out to like FSU multiple times in the last few weeks to try and set up travel plans to be here this week to help with practice coverage while also being here for recruiting. And they didn't give it to us until I was already in Tallahassee for the media luncheon on Monday. So that was also
not well done on their end, and they probably would acknowledge that as well for what it's worth as they were weighing these decisions. But yeah, no, it could have been handled better for sure.
But I also want to say this, like obviously Brendan has a different opinion because he's in Tallahassee and gets to watch these practices, and it's been super beneficial towards your job and helping you see football better. But for me, like selfishly, like I honestly think this is a better result for our website. Like I think we're going to be able to provide more like the true information that people want to hear about when it comes to practices, and something that we haven't
less filtered is what you're getting at, you think?
Yeah, well, like I think people are over, hey, this guy had a nice 3-rep sequence in practice. Like
I think they like that when they're winning. I think when they're
true.
losing, I think that's an aspect to it. Which, before I forget, like none of this matters to winning and losing. That's where I think like we're like this doesn't affect a ton. But if I were a college coach, I'd probably close off practice too. If every other college coach is doing it too, it's like, yeah, why am I going to do that? Because these coaches are control's really important to them. There's some paranoia with some coaches. Every little detail, and you're trying to find these little margins. So why? Like, why would you open it if everyone else? So I don't blame Mike for that. I think though that again where I stop is when you've done something one way and you've explained why, and it falls in line kind of with some of your core philosophies, and then that changes. That's more what I want to focus. Like, that's where my focus is. It's not really this. Yes, I can be bummed that they don't have practice access anymore, at least for the time being. We could see it might come back in the fall. Generally, when someone takes something away from you, I don't think you get it back in my life experience. But yeah, I think that's more where I'm yeah, long term is more. It's a data point for a shift as he's trying to kind of pivot and um, salvage things at Florida State.
I'm just not surprised we got here.
It kind of feels like overdue, right?
Yeah, I thought it was going to come after the ACC championship and injury reporting and things of that sort, but it didn't. Talking 2 years ago.
For what it's worth.
What else has been taken away from you, Brendan, that you didn't get back?
Toys, probably. Time.
So philosophical.
Thank you. All right, we good? Did we address this? And is there anything else we want to discuss? But yeah, I know Chris. Can I ask what makes you uncomfortable or not? Or maybe that's not the right word.
I'm not uncomfortable.
This isn't something you have an appetite for.
I don't like. I'm not here to parse a statement. Like, they closed it because they decide to close it. It's that simple. They're allowed to. It's their prerogative. I have to live by their rules, and now I have to adjust to said rules. And that's just how I view it. When it became official yesterday and we knew what the outline of how we would have to manage spring was, all I did was shift my focus and thought on how are we going to cover this in a different manner from a business standpoint. That's all it is to me. I don't like it. I don't love it. It doesn't matter that I don't like it and don't love it. Like, they don't give a shit. And it is what it is. So I'm not like going to worry about it. But at the same time, like, you went 2-10, things changed. This is among those changes. It is what it is.
Okay. Yeah, I think just going to gather my thoughts before we finish this. Yeah, I think change is the main word there. And it is a change for the better, change for the worse. We'll see. We'll see. It affects our jobs day to day, but like Zach said, we adjust, we'll figure it out. We kind of always have. So that's kind of where we'll go from here. One thing with the media access that does still exist is we get to talk to a lot of coaches, which is pretty cool. And that's something that is valuable and appreciated, and get an idea of their insight and how they kind of conduct themselves. And we were able to talk, obviously, with Coach Norvell, and we'll continue to talk to Mike for throughout extensive parts of the spring. That access will still be available. But we got the chance to talk to Coach Gus Malzahn, Coach Tony White, again, pretty much every single coach we talked to yesterday. I want to get your thoughts, Chris, on Gus. You got a chance to speak with him 10, 15 minutes. Story up on Knowles 24/7, just kind of about his process transitioning from head coach to offensive coordinator. Why are you smiling?
Just Coach Malzahn talks like a head coach. Like, that's what I keep going back to. Like, he's very good at being concise with quotes and relatively short with them. Yeah, it was a good conversation. It was me and a couple other media members from different outlets. And a majority of it was basically about your first spring with FSU and with this offensive personnel. And first and foremost, obviously, demoted from being a head coach to an OC in title last year versus this year. And there is, to some degree, I think, a great relief for him. I think he's excited to just go coach offensive football. As a head coach, as we know, this day and age, you're dealing with roster management, NIL, obviously appearances, managing both sides of the ball, everything that comes with that job. And it's very tough to just be a coach in the sense of coaching football on the football field. And I think for Gus, a guy who's relatively probably nearing the twilight of his career to a degree, he just wants to be an offensive coach. That's who and what he is. It's how he came up in the ranks. It's what he was back in the day. And he's now doing it with somebody that he did it with roughly 18 to 20 years ago at Tulsa, in Mike Norvell. Obviously, roles a little flipped in that regard because Mike was his pupil and now he's working under Mike. Obviously, while he is working under Mike, because of Gus's experience and great deal of success throughout his career, he has a lot of rope, and it's very much his baby on offense, and they're allowing him to do with it as he wants to do. He's funny. Like, he got asked 3 different questions, somewhat similar, and they all came back to principles, and he's just play fast, run downhill, pass vertically. Like, that's what he is. Like, he's not going to give you some expansive comments on that. He'll explain why those 3 things matter and how to get there and what they do. And like he talked about, the spring is going to be about fundamentals more than scheme. So playing fast may not entirely come with what they do in spring, but they're going to set the table to be that when August rolls around. And then obviously running downhill comes down to the running backs. He talked about Roydell Williams, someone he's familiar with, seems to like. And obviously for them to be able to run and or pass it, they're going to have to be able to block it. So he talked about the offensive line, 4 transfers in. Those guys are all probably likely starters for them, with Richie Leonard and TJ Ferguson sort of competing for the other spot. And it's going to be essential for them to be able to block. That's an area where FSU just must improve versus what they were a season ago when they were dreadful in the trenches.
Yes.
And passing it vertically, he talked a bit about Tommy Castellanos. He talked a little bit about Brock Glenn. Obviously, great deal of familiarity with Castellanos from his time at UCF with young men. And then with Glenn, it's more about the relationship they've formed here, essentially over a 75 to 90-day period since the arrival of Gus here, and especially since like tour of duty and winter conditioning program happened. And I thought the most interesting quotes from Gus specific to personnel were on Deuce Robinson and Squirrel White. Thinks very highly of both young men. Both are different in what they can do. Deuce is obviously more of the vertical, get straight, get downfield, big guy, catch it, go-to receiver type guy. And then Squirrel White's a little bit more a versatile package that can do a little bit of everything and can be creative in an offense like Gus Malzahn's. He talked about that. But like at the end of that story I wrote, and some of the quotes I came back to is something he said early and late in the conversation, which was just like a relief of this is what I'm doing. And like a rejuvenation, I think is how I described it. And that came off in a 10, 12-minute conversation with him. He clearly came off as someone who's got a strong level of excitement to actually get out there with the 11 guys that are on the field in any given moment on the offensive side of ball and figuring out the 22 to 33 guys they can rely upon on that side of ball and trying to put the thing together and, bring FSU back from the doldrums of being a dreadful offense in 2024 with the hopes of being something that's competitive and can put them in position to do something in 2025.
One thing that all right, let's stop real quick here because I think I want to get Zach's thoughts on Tony White and kind of get into some of the different tidbits that we got in that I think are instructive. But as we're talking about Gus Malzahn and the offense, I think big picture for Florida State, where they're at, where they're going with Mike Norvell and kind of his pivot as a coach and how he's trying to salvage this thing. The addition of Gus Malzahn was supposed to free him up to do things because
he spoke about that yesterday. Yeah. So Mike
talked about.
You
want me to quote it real quick?
I don't know if you want to go with a full quote since it's a bit lengthy.
No, I'm not going for the whole entire.
Okay, have at it.
Okay. It was a huge for the program, huge for me. It allows me a lot more flexibility to be able to connect where I believe I need to connect, whether it's more time that I can be able to spend around players in the weight room, whether it's more time for guys, if there's an issue that occurs. So that's basically what he says. And he kind of addressed it also with things he learned from last season. Fits kind of neatly into that is like he needs to be more engaged in being around the players more is one thing I think that he thought he could have learned from last season's debacle. So those are, to me, Chris, pretty aligned to each other and the value that Mike sees in Gus.
Yeah, what I took from that quote and the conversation with Gus and how they kind of aligned is that like when you're a guy who thinks so heavily offensive minded as Mike Norvell and Gus Malzahn both do from the same family of coaching technique basically for the scheme, I think it's tough to be that obsessed with offense while also trying to be a head coach role this day and age. And I thought Mike's quote spoke to, I have divorced the offense to some degree because I found somebody that I trusted with in Gus. And I'm going to go do a lot of the other things I think it's essential for me to do for our football team to be in the best position to basically be the best version of themselves. And do I think Mike Norvell is completely walking from the offense? I don't. I think he'll still dabble in it here and there and be involved, and definitely him and Gus will spitball with each other and make some decisions. But I think there's a degree of Mike understands that when the time demanded of him has to be elsewhere and it can't be with the offense, that he has somebody he can trust with the offense.
Go ahead, Zach. Is that encouraging to you?
Yes, I think so. I've heard that he's been with the defensive coaches a ton, like over the last month, just trying to make sure that everything's, working out there. So, I mean, he's definitely freed up and being able to take his time to address other needs in the program. I still think, from a recruiting standpoint, we might need to see more of that, just because of how, hard they're going to need to work in that sense. But I'm not going to go on a long tangent there. That's just my personal opinion. But yeah, I think overall it's a great thing, right? That's kind of what we argued that Norvell needed to do heading into the offseason, and seems like that's kind of the full plan now is freeing him up, and obviously he put a large emphasis on the player relationship, getting to talk with those guys and making sure that they're all on the same page and pouring into their development. And something that Dane brought up, which I think could be in play here, is just him valuing player attention. So building those relationships so that when the renegotiation season comes up, when these portal windows open, he's got a good baseline, being now a CEO like head coach, to kind of have a better relationship with all those players individually and making sure that he understands all their situations. So yeah, I think that could also be in play, but overall I think it's a positive development.
You mentioned recruiting, Zach. It doesn't sound like you want to particularly get into it right now. I did like Chris's rye smile there. Is there anything else other than a rye whiskey in the rye smile? I don't think they're spelled the same way.
Rye bread.
Fair enough. That's a good point. Of course, Chris went to the carbs. For recruiting conversation, we don't have to go in depth about concerns. I'm sure there'll be plenty of time in June when things are a little slow or whatnot, to where we can sit down and talk about where recruiting is going. Maybe it won't be as slow in June. Maybe this new staff will get some high hit rates in the summertime. But I digress. You did ask Coach Norvell about some of the things yesterday. You asked him about some of the things that they've evaluated with the recruiting process, and something that he wanted to address in the off season. I have the answer in front of me. I don't have to read it necessarily. Do you remember the answer enough to just talk
I have it in front of me. I can,
all right, so go for it to kind of glean what you glean.
Yeah, honestly, like, to be honest, I didn't expect him to get super in depth here, as he normally doesn't.
It was one of the shorter answers. It was only like 2 paragraphs.
Yeah, and people don't really ask him about recruiting that often. So I did want to throw that question in there to see what he would say. I mean, the only notable thing, in my opinion, was that he mentioned how when they have top targets, guys that they've evaluated as the right fit, in his words, they have to close on them at a better clip. I thought that was important. That was good for him to say. But that was basically the only thing in the entire answer, that because my question was, within your recruiting operation, what did you identify as things that maybe needed some tuning heading into the offseason, and what steps did you take to address some of that? And he didn't really mention, aside from what I just brought up, the closing on top targets, he didn't really mention any other specific things that he felt that they needed to improve at in the recruiting operation. And some people were interpreting him, so he said this, he goes, obviously last year was a disappointment where we didn't get the job done. I think he's talking about the season here, and it was at an extreme level. That's further an emphasis on him talking about the actual results on the field and not results in recruiting. And then he says there were some extreme changes that we made. I took that as all the firings that he had to do
The coaches.
with his coaching staff.
Yeah, I did too.
But other media members are tweeting, oh, he made extreme changes to the recruiting operation. I don't think that's what he was getting at there.
He didn't. And he kind of, when he talked about the evaluation, like you said, that's things that we've been really good at.
Yeah, and it's like,
so that's kind of, he's telling you without telling you, like, I feel good about that area. We just need to get better.
But they misevaluated a ton of their roster last year.
To me, the main part of that quote was the part about closing on kids, and that goes back to June, and they just didn't. And that they didn't close in June, July, August on kids before they went 2-10.
Yeah, and we've seen how they close in signing days for the most part, aside from this past year. So yeah, I mean, I didn't take away a ton from it. I still pretty much had the same sentiment, but I did want to get that question across to see kind of if he would bring up anything specific when it came to things that he changed in the recruiting operation. But if you're talking about just from what we could see on the outside, I mean, they had some recruiting, off-field staffers leave the program, and I think they brought in one and Devin Rispres as the director of recruiting.
I think that's correct. Yes, Zach.
Yeah.
So.
Oh yeah, I guess nodding isn't great for the podcast audience. Sorry. Yeah, we've talked about that part of it already. We have our thoughts on it, and we'll see. It's their evaluation is up to be evaluated at this point. So Tony White, I got to talk to him on record for about 15 minutes or so and try to gather some some ideas of different aspects of like their hybrid positions or some of the unique positions in the scheme that he's implementing. The jack position I thought was interesting to kind of get some insight into what type of player he wants there. And I think more so like the usage of they're going to go 4 down front, 3 down front. Sounds like a lot more 4 down based on what we can kind of gather. Talk about the rover and some players competing there as well. What, Zach, I thought was really interesting is like the amount of different names that have been kind of thrown around at the jack position, because you talk to JP, he's thrown some linebackers out there. You talk to Terrence Knighton, and he's mentioning linebackers and defensive end types. Tony White too, talking about guys who weigh between 260 playing it and guys who weigh 230. So it's interesting to see the different types of players that they're looking at for that role.
Yeah, my takeaway was that I just don't think that they're going to use the jack position as much as they have in previous iterations of Tony White's defense, just because this roster, they haven't recruited towards that position before, Tony White got here in December. They're starting to in the 2026 class, but they don't have a lot of true pass rusher types, either in the linebacker room or a defensive end that were already here because of the 4-man front that they were running before. So I think they're going to base mostly out of a 4 down front. From that, I guess that was my takeaway from talking to all these coaches is that I just don't like you mentioned these names at Jack linebacker, like an Elijah Herring or Amari Williams, and there are a number of other guys that when you look at what that position's been at other spots for Tony White, they don't exactly fit the mold of what would be asked of a player in that role, in my opinion. Maybe there's aspects to each of their game that do fit with what that position asks for, but I don't think they're the ideal fits. So yeah, I just don't think we're going to see as much of the jack position out of obviously the 3-man front with the linebacker going down to the line of scrimmage.
I mean, it's just going to be a 4-man front with that. I mean, Tony described it as the jack being someone who plays at the line of scrimmage and drops back sometimes.
Okay.
So like it's shifting from what it was. What are you smiling about now, Chris?
The most disappointing thing to me about the change of media policy is not being able to see what the defense looks like in any form or fashion, because Tony White's defense has been different with different years and different people in different places.
That might be part of the reason why they don't want media there, Chris, is because it is a tactical advantage.
That's like one of the things. I was going into spring with I just want to see what it looks like. I have an idea what a Gus Malzahn's offense is going to be, and I have a pretty strong inkling of who the primary candidates for offensive roles are sort of at the top of the list. Like, I feel good about that. Defense, I don't feel the same way. Defense to me was very much we're getting ready to paint a picture, but we don't even have an outline on the paper.
Tony talked about that, by the way, of like how much they were going to like this. We may have a cornerback who we move to safety one day and realize, yeah, that worked. We might have a defensive.
How do these different linebackers work in different roles at linebacker? Do we use one almost as an edge rusher or jack or some other role beyond just a traditional Mike Sam Will? Defensive line, are we looking at 3? Are we looking at 4? How many guys are sliding from the inside to the outside? How much movement is there pre-snap? There's so many little inklings and nuances to the defense under Tony White that I was really intrigued to see, and we won't outside of one scrimmage. So that truthfully is like the most disappointing thing to me about the change of policy. What?
Buyers to Known, sponsored by
the Turner Group.
We all had Chris being the one who would bring up the media policy.
No. I'm just saying, like that is the area. Like,
we're done here, Chris.
We closed the book.
I am done with the media policy. I'm just saying that's the place where it's
I think you care about it the most.
No, I definitely don't care about it most, Zach. I didn't write 1,000 words last night, sir. That was Mr.
You said it was well done.
I did, but I didn't write it. I didn't feel the need to write it. I pretty much could have written about 9 words.
I would have read that.
It would be like turning in the paper. This is the paper.
Yeah, that would have done well. That would have.
No, I'm not super excited about FSU football in 2025. If we're being matter of fact, just being upfront about that. I was excited to see what the defense would look like because I think I like Tony White. I think highly of him. I enjoy talking to him.
He's
I
super
think
impressive, man.
he's a
He
very
is.
football-minded person, and I enjoy that in him. And I feel like he replaced a DC who was football-minded, but I feel like Tony's got a better personality for the college game, personally. I was just intrigued to see that. Like, I wanted to see, as he threw the paint against the canvas, what it came out to look like, whether good, bad, or ugly, or like incomplete. I just wanted to see it, and I'm disappointed that really won't get a chance to see that.
They're talking about James Williams being up to 265. I thought that was interesting. He's listed at the roster 262, so water weight or whatnot. But for someone who's played at 250, Tony White joked about this. Like, if you just saw his lower half kids show last year, you would have thought he was a wide receiver, and so he's kind of redistributed. And that's a guy who needs to be an every down player for you, right? For your defense to be able to reach its potential and be a top 20-ish unit or so nationally. That's someone you need who's to be on the field consistently and play good snaps.
Did Tony talk about Elijah Herring, or was that somebody else on the defense?
Tony mentioned, but I think it was no. Terrence Knighton talked about him as a jack, and JP did when Zach talked to JP as someone who has like depth. It was actually kind of interesting the way JP talked about it, because he's like, this. We know this person has pass rush juice, like for sure. But one of the reasons why he came here was to be developed more so as a traditional linebacker. So like that's going to be another, like, there's all these little subplots in the spring is like, how are you going to balance that? And we saw him play at Memphis, played in space pretty well. But someone who has, blitzing upside as well, which if you're, the defense is going to be super interesting. I'm excited. What? I was going to say I'm excited to see it. I'm excited to hear about it and how it's coming together and to find out about it, because I think there's so many moving pieces.
Jabril Rawls.
185. We haven't talked about the weight gains. He's up to 185. Do people just not read what I write? That's it. Never mind. I answered my own question. We're good. The caveats don't matter. Yeah, Tony White. What did you think, Zach? You got to chat with Tony White for a little bit, like just personality wise, like just his vibe, his whole setup. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I like how candid he is.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of my, I think, favorite early impressions of Tony White. Just tell it how it is. Honestly, I mean, he'll be the first to tell you if a player is not ready to contribute, and vice versa. If he's really impressed with someone, he'll come out and say like, this guy's a dude. But yeah, I mean, his overall thoughts, like I think he's definitely someone that's going to have more, like, he's definitely a guy that's like, let's put the pads on and figure this out, and doesn't want to kind of like project what his defense is going to look like just based on tour duty and guys just running around in t-shirts and shorts. So yeah, I think we'll get more clarity from him specifically in our media interviews and press conferences with Tony White during spring football after practices, and just getting his thoughts on how players are progressing. And I do think that he's going to be very candid. He's not a coach speak kind of guy, in my opinion, just from getting to watch that interview with you yesterday, Brendan. Like, I thought he was one of the more candid coaches that we spoke to.
Yeah, very thoughtful. It does remind me a lot of Adam Fuller in many ways, but maybe a little bit more. Less tightly wound.
Don't say that.
I love that.
Come on, B.
Less northern.
Less northern is a good way to put it. More Californian.
Zach also talked to Evan Cooper, safeties coach, John Papuchis, linebackers coach. Any tidbits from those two?
JP, I think, is very much likes to be back with the linebackers. That's a position that he obviously, aside from his last 5 years at FSU, that's pretty much what he's coached at the college ranks, is linebacker.
He did seem happy, Zach. Like happier.
He also was. Yeah, they also just got. I mean, college coaches almost never get breaks, and they just got time off for spring break, and he was all sunburnt.
He did have a little sunburn going on
from going to the beach.
Oh, he's refreshed. Good.
Yeah. So no, I mean, he definitely looked excited, and I think that just goes back to him being more comfortable coaching the linebacker spot. And he's already built a good relationship with the guys in his room. He's excited about the returning guys, and obviously I think of the newcomers, Elijah Herring is that name that will be the biggest contributor. I think Caleb LaValle is a little bit farther away, but I think he'll have some kind of a role this year. They have I wouldn't call it like an extremely talented room, but they have a deep room of capable players and guys that have the capability to take a next step, like a Blake Nicholson or Juice Cryer. And then
in the sense that I think there's not a huge gap between.
they're all kind of serviceable, but it's to be determined on which guys.
Whether you have a playmaker, maybe.
Yeah. Like I think the two with the biggest potential for that are Nicholson and Elijah Herring, in my opinion.
Yeah, athletic profile wise. Yes.
Yeah. But also Juice Cryer, I think, is one of the more reliable guys in that room.
Elijah is ultra experienced, and that plays a big role. Elijah was good at Tennessee and excellent when he transferred down to Memphis. The interesting thing, when he transfers back up, will that carry over? And I think it will, personally. I thought Elijah Herring was one of the 4 or 5 best players they took this past cycle. But I am interested, again, how does Tony White basically put him in the best position to be as successful as he can? Because to me, Elijah Herring's a guy that's really good at some things, but he's specific to those things. He's not super versatile where he can do a plethora of different things. I think there are things that you play to his strengths, and that's why he brings value to at linebacker position. But I think they also knew that when they recruited. The way they spoke about him as a recruit and then as they signed him, and the way he talked about things when he did his introductory press conference with the media in January or early February, I feel like that's fairly well aligned, which is a good thing, positive.
Oh, Zach's gone.
I talked to you. Want me to talk about the offensive coaches I talked to? Because I also talked to Tim Harris Jr., wide receivers coach.
That's super.
Yeah,
wide receiver is probably one of the more intriguing positions. I was going to say it a lot. I'm going to have to get
it's interesting with Tim because a decent amount of the guys in that room he didn't really recruit or even wasn't really involved with. Like Jordan Scott was a Mike Norvell recruitment largely before the change at a position. He was, I believe, to some degree involved with Deuce and Squirrel, but really that room was composed by other people, whether it be Gus Malzahn, Mike Norvell, prior coaches at the position, for example. So it feels like he's getting to know those guys as those guys are getting to know him. But he does know Hakeem Williams. Well, I asked him directly about him, basically about what he has to do to be a player that was sort of expected of him coming out of high school ranks. I thought he had a good quote about his maturity. It sounds like he's had a good winter conditioning program in the sense of stepping up in that regard. Talked about Tayshawn Gelsey, who was listed, correct me if I'm wrong, 235, I think, on the updated roster.
Yeah,
it came in at 215, which was his recruit weight.
Well, real quick, just because the caveat here that people did not read on the website is that the listed weights for all the newcomers are not weights that they took during official visits. It's usually just from the 24/7 sports profile. So that's what his weight was going into his senior year of high school or like a camp in his junior off season or something like that. So when people are making a lot about a 20-pound weight gain, maybe more like a 10-pound one.
Right. Split the difference, say it was 225, maybe slightly above that. And he's probably carrying a little weight that's not really real weight on the frame currently. So maybe he's a few pounds less. Anyways, still probably 230 plus. I asked, how does he stay at receiver versus being viewed as a tight end? Because in the recruiting process, plenty of schools viewed him as a tight end.
Florida
FSU did not. They recruited him as a receiver. He intends to be a receiver. He wants to be a receiver. That's why he's here. And Tim Harris's junior comment was very good, but basically came down to movement skills. You watch him move, he's very capable of doing. He's good. You did joke that Chris Thompson's trying to yank Tayshawn away at times. We talked about Squirrel. We talked about Deuce, and great quotes from Gus Malzahn on those two. Tim Harris Jr. was also good on both of those guys. I think the best thing I can say about Deuce is anybody and everybody you talk to about Deuce Robinson since the moment he walked onto campus, they glow when they talk about just like him being committed to it, both in work ethic, being a good teammate, and just wanting to be that dude, like wanting to be the receiver. And I think that's a big positive for FSU. He spoke a lot about like LeWayne McCoy's, Elijah, BJ Gibson, all those guys that were basically first-year guys last year. He didn't get a ton of burn. And he said there's Wantu there. He thinks very highly of LeWayne. Again, familiarity with him because of his South Florida ties from UCF and prior to UCF. So all in all, I think Tim Harris Jr. is pretty excited about his group, wants to get out there. I think we know Deuce and Squirrel are sort of the top 2 guys there. It's going to be very interesting to watch how the rest of it sorts out. Does Hakeem take a next step? Does one of those young guys, Lil Wayne McCoy, maybe being a leading candidate, or even BJ Gibson, but he's splitting time with baseball right now? Does one of them kind of ascend and become the next guy up? Like, who's essentially the third guy at receiver for them? Can it be a Jordan Scott, kid coming out of JUCO who's big, can do a lot of things? But again, JUCO isn't exactly a place where guys usually get their skills refined at a high level. So, any questions about receiver before I move on to Yak?
No, real quick. Clay did do a 33-minute interview with Urban. So you got small.
I'm like,
you got O-line talk on your YouTube channel.
Who did you guys get? And I'm like, I got Gus, I got Yak, I got Tim Harris Jr. Talked to all of them roughly, like 7 to 12 minutes, depending on who it was. I got Herb Hand for 33 minutes. It's like, Jesus H. Christ. Like, there's only so many O-linemen in that room, and there's only so much O-line scheme you can talk about. But hey, Clay be Clay.
And then Dane got Terrence.
He's a former offensive lineman, so it makes sense.
I think both of their
Herb does like talking, though, to his credit. I mean, the man did ask us what our Taco Bell order was at the table and how to say pecan versus pecan, which I don't know exactly where that conversation went because I came in the middle and I left before it ended. So I'm not sure exactly what that conversation was about. Right,
I think pecan if you're just talking about the nut, but if you're saying you want like pecan ice cream or something like that.
Or pie, the thing that's really all about.
Yeah, pecan pie. I don't think there's really pecan ice cream.
So many carbs in this one today.
Yeah, I can't imagine that that's all Chris bringing up the pie.
I don't like pecan pie.
What?
I don't. I'm not much of a pie guy. I know that's shocking. I love cake. Don't love pie.
Chris didn't like the key lime pie. Yes, no, that's not.
No, I did enjoy the key lime pie. It was good.
He's disappointed. That's all they had.
Yeah. Again,
he wanted tiramisu.
You wanted them to have an entire spread.
No, I just want cake or
Chris,
cupcake. I like cake. Brownies. I love the Italian dessert brownies that you like a cake.
Say the Italian dessert you love.
Oh, tiramisu. I absolutely love tiramisu.
Yeah. The inflection is just not correct, and it's adorable.
All right, David Johnson.
Manny Diaz.
Not doing that one. Manny, no. Yak. Talk to Yak Attack. Pretty straightforward what Yak usually is. I find it funny. Like every year when I talk to Yak at that, it's like the laundry list of players in the position. It's a quick comment from Yak.
He's good at that.
Yeah, it's like up to 220 now. This guy's you got 20 miles an hour on the GPS. Yep,
it's like the teacher that comes into the classroom the same way for 20 years. That's how I feel it is talking to Yak about running backs. But he was excited for Jalen Lucas being healthy. Said he's healthy, ready to go. Said it's tough to keep Jalen off the field, and we've kind of seen that. Jalen's put out some workout videos and stuff he's doing. Cam Akers lost a little bit of weight. I think he thinks
Cam Davis. Age is showing.
Oh yeah, sorry, Cam Davis. At least it's a running back in the FSU family.
Would you take Cam Akers on this team? Yes.
Oh hell yeah, I'd always take Cam Akers. Love Cam Akers.
Imagine him running the Wildcat in this with Gus, who likes to run Wildcat.
Roydell healthy. Last year felt like such a lost year with him after he got hurt in practice.
Yeah. I was gonna say, don't talk about that, but what are they gonna do?
Fire Sonone. Roydell Williams is the favorite to start at running back right now.
I will buy that right now, but I think Usman Chroma will come in here and compete at a high level.
Fire Sonone. Roydell Williams is a starting running back at the end of the season.
Sonone.
So yeah, I think it starts with Roydell, and we'll see.
I think I'll buy it because I think they might keep his name at the top of the list as a seniority thing and a productive guy. But like carry distribution, I think it's going to trend towards the Sonone. On Chroma, I did ask about him. Yak said they talk on a near daily basis, that they're working a lot on just getting playbook ideas down. So when he walks in May, he's ready to go. I think he said he just wrapped up basketball season there at Leesburg, Lee County. And they're obviously super excited about him. That he's a guy that fits what Gus does with running backs, probably as good as anybody they'll have in that room game one of day one of season one or whatever.
Alabama.
Yeah, Alabama. So all in all, Yak was normal Yak. You can go watch it. Talks about each guy. He's funny. He always brings up Sam Singleton because I think he thinks we always forget about Sam Singleton.
So does our message board, for what it's worth.
And it's funny. Like, Sam's got good straight line speed. I think the most appealing thing about Sam is that he's done a really good job of rounding himself out as a running back. He's become much better at a lot of things that position demands instead of just being a guy who gets the ball in his hand, goes fast, and goes straight, which is what he was largely when he walked through the door.
Chris Thompson, did you talk to him, Zach?
I did.
You're supposed to. I can't remember if you did.
Yeah, he mentioned, just gave some quick thoughts on all his tight ends. Really likes Marqueston Douglas coming back and being a reliable piece that they can put out there and not have to worry about him, getting phased in the moment. Like, he's very much, talk about him being the same guy off the field, when it comes to just like feeling comfortable with him as when he's on the field. Like, you
The
don't
man
even
once
have to
caught
really.
a pass with his butt, so
Yeah.
yeah, he's pretty unflappable.
Did he talk about him being in shape?
Yeah. You didn't mention any concern there. I mean, obviously said that he's a bigger guy. So they're going to obviously use him more as a blocker, like we saw Arizona State did this past season.
What did he weigh in at?
I think he's 270.
Yeah.
Oh, that's pretty.
So when he was here, his best season, he was in the best shape of his career. Then he got a little heavier, and I think there was a degree of like, hey, we want you a little lighter while still being big and capable of blocking. He came in, he returned from Arizona State in pretty good shape. I think they were really happy about that. I think that's a major reason they took him back. There's a degree of at that position what they want of him comes at a certain weight mark, which is probably 265 to 275. Anything above that, and he's probably a little too heavy on his feet to be as effective as they think he can be.
What are they going to call him if he gets lighter? Biscuit's not going to work so much anymore.
Yeah, I was joking with someone about that. Like, I don't know if you guys can use the same nickname anymore.
What's it when you have bread without yeast in it?
Gluten-free?
No, it's a type of.
I don't know. Continuing on tight ends.
Pita? No.
Landon Thomas. They're very much expecting him to take the next step. I think he's going to play a big role. Then obviously the other one is Randy Pittman, who they brought over from UCF. Super familiar with the scheme. I think he's put on a good amount of mass as well this offseason, and should be a major contributor in that room. And then the wild card, in my opinion, is Chase Lofton, the true freshman that they just brought in January. I think, like, from just talking to people around the program, like, he's one of the true freshmen that everyone is raving about. Yeah, I mean, people that are not even on the offensive side of the football are like, yeah, like, that was a really good get for them. I mean, he moved, like, his movement stuff has been described as like wide receiver like, but he's going to play tight end. And he's been an extremely hard worker in tour duty and their offseason conditioning. So interested to see if he can carve out some kind of role. Obviously, it's a pretty packed room now. But yeah, I think he's got the talent for it. And then, Thompson mentioned being not upset, but obviously, wishes that he could have Amari Williams playing more tight end, but it looks like he's going to primarily focus on defensive end, at least for the spring. And, I think, Thompson's like, I'll be the first one to be excited and congratulate him for a sack or whatever on the defensive side. But obviously Amari Williams did show promise as a tight end this past season for FSU.
Chase Lofton, to me, has what AZ Thomas had going for him. I know that's a weird comparison. They both have older brothers.
Basically the same player.
They both have older brothers who have competed at a high level. Now, Wanye's in the NFL, and Braden, I don't know if he'll be an NFL guy, but they're sort of like they walk through the door knowing what it takes. And there's always a degree of like that helps to really shed a lot of the things that a freshman goes through in the sense of maturing and learning and just realizing the time demands and all of that. Because you have a sibling that went through it. And in their case, I'm pretty sure Braden and Chase relatively similar in age and clothes, from what I understand. I'm sure that helped. So yeah,
Similar
it doesn't surprise me.
clothes?
Similar and close in age.
Oh, okay.
Bread
Oh, maybe
boy.
they shared the same shirts.
You also talked to tow cars, albeit not on video. Anything in particular from that, Zach?
Nothing really. I mean, he's excited about Castellanos. Been described as a guy that's just, it's something that Norvell and Gus talked about, but it's been around and just helping everyone, like, is helping guys move in. It's just always around the facility, hanging out with teammates at all different position groups. I think that's just something that they obviously view as a positive, because that was a stark difference from what they had last year. And with DJU being kind of an older guy at a different point in his life than a lot of the rest of the team, and is living far from campus. So it's just, it's a stark difference from this past year, and reminds them some of what made Jordan Travis so special. Easy for me to say. And yeah, I mean, I don't think it's like, it hasn't been described to me as like on a Jordan Travis type level when it comes to his involvement and just being friendly with, like, friends with everyone on the team, it seemed like. But it's getting there, and that's something that they want to see out of the guy that's going to lead their team.
Cool. I think that was a instructive episode. We got to talk about Chris's favorite topic in the world, and then we got to talk
You want to bring it
about
up again, Chris?
Yeah, one more time for the end of it.
I'm good, boys.
All right, Chris is good. For Chris Nee, Zach Blostein, I'm Brendan Sinone. This has been On the Bench. We'll talk to you guys later.